I am not trying to advertise a brand. It's just the warmest sweatshirt I have, okay? We had a graveside, turn me down a little bit there, thank you. We had a graveside funeral this afternoon in Tennessee where the wind blows sweeping down the plains. And I got to tell you, I got chilled. I got a little cold out there and haven't been able to warm up, so we're doing better now. Doing much better in my sweatshirt. So, well, let's get started, shall we? I got to get done before the Cotton Bowl. So, that's what I hear, yeah. Yeah, you may miss the first little bit of it, but let's get going, okay? Nugget number 8. Nugget 8. Let's look at the temple tax. The temple tax, okay? Look at Matthew 17 with me. Matthew 17, verse 24. 24 says, when they came to Capernaum, those who collected the 2 drachma tax came to Peter and said, does your teacher not pay the 2 drachma tax? He said, yes. When he came into the house, Jesus spoke to him first, saying, what do you think, Simon? From whom do the kings of the earth collect customs or poll tax? From their sons or from strangers? Peter said, well, from strangers. Jesus said to him, then the sons are exempt. In other words, you don't tax your own family. However, so that we do not offend them, go to the sea and throw in a hook and take the first fish that comes up. When you open its mouth, you will find a shekel. Take that and give it to them for you and me. All right, we have a story here of a miracle. It is definitely a miracle, is it not? First of all, where are we? We're at Mount Hermon. Mount Hermon is where the Transfiguration has taken place, I believe. And we're going back down to the Sea of Galilee, okay? And so we're going from here to there in this story. There's a great Renaissance painting of the 1400s that shows this in a triptych. And in this particular story, here are the disciples and Jesus, and the man with his back to us there is the tax collector saying, where's the money? Okay? Off to the side then, Peter is sent over to the seashore, and he's got a fish, and he's taking a coin out of the fish, and then he walks over and gives it to the tax collector. All in one scene here, we've got the whole thing portrayed. What is the temple tax? What is the temple tax? Well, the temple tax is first told to us in Exodus 30. Let's go to Exodus 30, verse 11. Exodus 30, verse 11 says, the Lord also spoke to Moses, saying, when you take a census of the sons of Israel to number them, then each one of them shall give a ransom for himself to the Lord. And when you number them, so that there will be no plague among them when you number them. That's a pretty good deal. Pay the temple tax and not have any plague. All right? This is what everyone who is numbered shall give. Half a shekel according to the shekel of the sanctuary. The shekel is 20 gerahs, just in case you were wondering, okay? In case you wondered how much was it, it's 20 gerahs. Half a shekel is a contribution to the Lord. Everyone who is numbered from 20 years old and over shall give to the contribution of the Lord. The rich shall not pay more, and the poor shall not pay less than a half a shekel. When you give the contribution of the Lord to make atonement for yourselves, you shall take the atonement money from the sons of Israel and shall give it for the service of the tent of meeting, that it may be a memorial for the sons of Israel before the Lord to make atonement for yourselves. So in this, we're being told that they have to, when they do a census, which we're not really told how often the census is. There's no prescribed in Scripture how often they have to do this in Exodus, but when there is an accounting, everyone who's counted should give a half a shekel, and it goes towards the upkeep of the tabernacle. As we go forward into chapter 38, Exodus 38, and the 26th verse, we get kind of an update. Verse 25 says, the silver of those of the congregation who were numbered was 100 talents and 1775 shekels according to the shekel of the sanctuary, a bekah a head, that is half a shekel according to the shekel of the sanctuary. Now that ought to help you figure out what a gerah is, okay? You take the Becca, you divide it by the Gera is then times by the Shek. Anyway, so you figure it out and let me know. For each one of you passed over to those who were numbered, and from 20 years old upward, for 603,550 men. All right? And so you've got younger men, you've got kids, you've got ladies, you got all kinds of folks on top of that. And so this was silver that was collected for that. And then 2 Chronicles 24, verse 9. The temple has been repaired. They're finding the scrolls. They're finding out what used to be because they've been in captivity. They're not sure how to do things right because there's not been a temple. There have been priests. None of this has been carried out before. And so in verse 8 says, so the king commanded that they made a chest and set it outside the gate of the house of the Lord. Verse 9 says, they made a proclamation in Judah and Jerusalem to bring to the Lord the levy fixed by Moses, the servant of God, on Israel in the wilderness. So we've reinstituted the temple tax once we have a temple again. So the temple has always been this way. Now, the temple tax varied, and at one time they made it a third of a shekel rather than a half of a shekel because they were all poor coming out of exile, but it's always been there, and it's always been for the upkeep of the temple, okay? It's always been there for and the one person who didn't have to do that was the Levitical priests. The Levitical priests were exempted because their praise was the offering to God. The praise of the Levites was their offering. So it says when the people are numbered. And Scripture is not really clear as to when they were numbered. But how many of you know that the rabbis will take care of that? If it went in doubt, let's make up a law. Okay, let's make up a rule. And so they did, and so they began to take it annually. Annually, they would have this temple tax. Now, it was not one time a year where everybody ran and threw in the chest, but because there were 12 tribes in 12 months, guess what? Everybody gave for 1 month, and it came 1 month, and then the next group came in a month. Therefore, the payment for the temple was always monthly and always being taken care of. Okay? Very common sense, very workable, very, very, very good, and doing fine. So they did it annually, and you would because of your tribe, you might be in January, you might be in March, you might be in August, whenever it was, but you paid as your tribe paid, okay? But, even though it's annually, how much then is a half a shekel, or some verses say 2 drachma. Anybody have 2 drachma in yours? Anybody have half a shekel? Might have some both. Yeah, some might have some of both. Remember, folks, that at this time, everything was on a weight system. Our coins used to be valued by the weight of the gold and the silver until we went off the gold and the weight measures, okay? When we changed to just a currency, then suddenly it's a dime because I say it's a dime, that's why. But everything used to be weighted, and so they weighted this, and so 2 drachma could be the same as a half a shekel because it was the same measurement of silver. Now, the most common coin at the time of Jesus was this particular coin, which is a half shekel coin. All right? This is the half shekel. It's a very famous coin. They are very plentiful in the antiquities market. You can buy them quite easily, and they're legitimate. I mean, they're always counterfeits of the antiques, but you can legitimately buy some pretty good ones. These are incredibly clear. Most are not going to be this clear. They're going to be worn down, and maybe the eagle will be the only thing that shows up on the back side of one of the coins that you might buy. But what we're looking at is a Greek coin that was minted in the city of Tyre in Lebanon, okay? And it's called the Tyrian shekel because it comes from the city of Tyre. Now, isn't it amazing that the coin that pays for the upkeep of the temple would come from Tyre? Does anybody think of the connection between Tyre and the temple? King Hiram of Tyre sent down the cedars of Lebanon, and they were the foundation and the roof of the temple. And so here we have Tyrian coins that are supporting the Tyrian timbers of the temple, okay? Both from Tyre, okay? It was equal to about 1 or 2 days' wages for the average worker. So you're giving up about 1 or 2 days of wages to give this once-a-year offering to the temple for its upkeep. Tyre is up near the north there. You can see Tyre near the north and Jerusalem down there, kind of the coinage, we know that they were minted in Tyre between about 125 BC to 19 BC, which is the heart, the very heart of the time when the high priests were being replaced by puppets. Because we have been commanded to have no graven image of person or animal in the temple. And what's on this coin? A person and an animal, right? And so no honest, God-loving priest is going to take this as an offering, but these charlatan priests would. The ones who bought their position would take these. Well, the Romans actually destroyed the mint in Tyre around that 18 BC time, but they were still being made until 70 AD. And so all we know, this is a guess, total guess, but we believe that there had to have been a Roman mint around Jerusalem somewhere that was still minting these shekels. Okay, and again, it's by weight. It's silver weight. It's the weight of the silver itself. But we have these shekels going clear up to the destruction of Jerusalem, 70 AD. In fact, this was one of the coins that was found in the ditch in the pilgrimage road from the Pool of Siloam up to the temple. Do you remember we've seen some of the coins that were discovered? One of them was a Tyrian shekel. And so this is the coin that the money changers helped to exchange that Jesus got ticked off at. Okay? And it would have been a Tyrian shekel that they would have changed their foreign money into these particular shekels. So it's a common coin. It's a very common coin, and is the price then of this temple tax. Now look at verses. Go back to Matthew with me. Let's read the last couple of verses there. Matthew 17, Matthew 17 is where we were. And verse 25, it says, "Does your master not pay the tax?" And he said, "Yes." And when he came into the house, Jesus spoke to Simon and said, "What do you think, Simon? From whom do the kings of the earth collect customs or poll tax? From their sons or from strangers?" Peter said, "From strangers." Jesus said to him, "Then the sons are exempt." Now, Jesus is saying a phenomenal thing here. Once again, he's coming against the priests, but not the practice. Moses and God ordained the practice of the offering to give to the keeping of the temple. But the taking of a foreign coin with a head on it would be anathema to God. God had already said, "I don't want this in my temple." And so when Jesus is talking about this, he says, who should be giving this kind of a tax? Should the Jews, who are the children, be giving this? Or should the foreigners be giving this who don't know any better? And he said, well, the foreigners, the children of the king, shouldn't have to pay a tax. Who was the child of the king at this time? The Jews. You see? So he's saying, yes, we have to take care of the temple. We have to take care of the temple. But folks, by this time, the illegitimate priests had levied so many taxes, and the Romans had levied so many taxes, that it was becoming cumbersome. We know all throughout the Old Testament. How many times throughout the Old Testament do we see kings throwing taxes on the people that were not godly taxes? They were selfish, dynastic taxes that the king wanted because he had a harem or he had some hot chick in the castle, And so he was constantly taxing people for his pleasures. And Jesus is coming about and saying, those of us that are children of Israel shouldn't have to pay this tax. This is a tax for the foreigners because it's a foreign coin and breaks the rule of God. But, he says, so that we do not offend them, go to the sea and throw in a hook and take the first fish that comes out. When you open its mouth, you will find a shekel. Okay? God's royal family should have been exempted from this particular thing. But there on the seashore where the fish were plentiful and where Capernaum was a harbor city, it was a fishing city, there were 5 cities along the coast that did nothing but fish. Now, if you go another mile down the sea line, then it's not very good fishing. And it's farming, and it's flat. And there's the what is called the plain of Magdala. the plain of Magdala, which is wonderful farmland because it's lake bottom flat property, and it's just great farming. But there's not much fishing there. Not much in the way of fishing. It all goes around to the north, okay? The fishing was found up north. The St. Peter's fish was the tilapia, which is a cichlid fish and a cousin to the carp, basically. It's a very clean fish. It's not a bottom feeder. It's a very kosher fish, and is a very common fish to be caught in the Sea of Galilee. Okay? We've talked about that before. We've talked about there are sardines in the Sea of Galilee, and there are tilapia, and those are the two main eaten fish in the Sea of Galilee. And sometimes the New Testament talks about the sardines being gathered up, and sometimes it talks about the tilapia being gathered up, the big fish and the small fish. Okay? When you go to Israel today, one of the stops that you will probably have is on the Sea of Galilee, and you will be offered St. Peter's fish. Now, you can get the whole fish, you can get the fillet. If the head bothers you, don't worry, we'll get you a fillet. But you can get the whole fish and have it cooked very much like they would have on the seashore at the time of Jesus, okay? And so you get tilapia and fries, fish and fries when you get that. Now, I found this online about tilapia because I've always wondered about the fish having a coin in its mouth. Now, you know that fish have little mouths unless you stretch them open, and you stretch the gill open, and you can get your whole thumb into a fish, right? Into its mouth and pull the hook out. But this particular article said something very, very interesting about tilapia. Look at the second paragraph. The male fertilizes the eggs, then the female collects them and cares for them in her mouth to protect them. The cichlid fish have this tendency to actually put the eggs in their mouth, and their mouth, after spawning, expands and becomes extra large. It then says after several weeks, the eggs hatch into fry that starts swimming, but close to the mother's mouth in case of danger. Those little fry can all fly back into the mother's mouth for protection. And she'll swim around with her babies in her mouth until the danger is past. In other words, it would be very common for a tilapia to have an enlarged mouth that could hold a coin. Exactly. If there's going to be a fish that would fit the bill, it's this one. And so it's a part of the tilapia itself. Well, I think that's kind of a half a nugget anyway. I think that's a pretty interesting point to learn about that. But nugget number one is, it tells us the age of the disciples. This temple tax tells us the age of the disciples. Look at verse 27. However, so that we do not offend them, go to the sea and throw in a hook and take the first fish that comes up, and when you open its mouth, you will find a shekel. Take that and give it to them for you and me. It says for the tax for you and me. In other words, there's going to be enough here for two of us because we're the only two that are over the age of 20. The disciples of Jesus, the word that's used for young men there, means usually between the age of 15 and 19. When we see pictures of these bearded men wandering around carrying scrolls and the disciples of Jesus, and old men of 30 and 40 and 50, wandering around, old men of 30 and 40. Anyway, when we see those around there, that's not factual. Only two of them required the temple tax. Or else Jesus would have had enough money for all of them. Wouldn't he? Would have paid for the whole crowd. But he said, Peter, you and I are the only ones old enough to have to pay this tax. Go down there, fish the fish, bring back the coin. All right? Now, that coin, there's only one coin in all of Israel that is equal to 4 drachma. And it's a golden Alexander the Great stater, it's called, S-T-A-T-E-R. It's about half the size of the shekel. I enlarged it so you could see it. But it's about half the size, but it's gold, and so it's worth twice as much. One coin would equal the 2 coins for the two of them. And the Bible's very clear, there was one coin. And so when Peter went down there, can you imagine when he opened that fish's mouth and saw the glitter of gold? The glitter of gold in its mouth. And he took it out. Now, the Bible does not say that's the coin, but it's the only coin of the period There were so many of the 2 shekel coins. The 4 shekel coins were gold and were highly prized and were not nearly as common. So he found the 1 coin and paid for the 2 of them, because the rest of the boys were just that, boys. Okay? So here's a nugget that's hidden in this passage that tells us the age. So nugget number 1, the age of the disciples. Now nugget number 2, this is the exact same coin that Judas received in his 30 pieces of silver. The coin for the upkeep of the temple was what the temple gave back to Judas, because it was the common coin they could put their hands on. And he received the 30 half shekels of silver. Now, is there any significance in that 30 pieces? I believe there is. I believe there's some real significance here. First of all, 30 pieces of silver, according to Exodus, is the cost of a slave who's been killed. God says if your ox gores a slave, or if it stomps on a slave and kills him, or if your cart falls over and kills a slave, in other words, if you're doing farm work and your slave gets killed, you owe the family 30 pieces of silver. All right? So the price of a slave was 30 pieces. Now, was Jesus being sold as a slave? Possibly. Possibly they just saw him as worthless as a slave, as easy to replace as a slave. After all, he was just one more rabble-rouser from Galilee, not worthy of any more than the cost, jingle, 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 of a slave. But I think the number 30 has more meaning. I think that he received 30 pieces of silver because you had to be 30 years of age to serve as an Aaronic priest. You could not serve in the temple until you were 30 years of age. Ezekiel in chapter 1, verse 1 says, "And in my 30th year I saw a vision." Ezekiel was called to be a prophet at age 30. We know that Joseph was made the overseer by Pharaoh of all of the land when he had turned 30. He began to rule. We know that King David was anointed when he was age 30. We know that John the Baptist began his ministry at age 30. And how old was Jesus when he began his ministry? 30. The number 30 is the beginning of the ruling and the reigning of a prophet or a priest or a king. And Jesus was purchased with 30 pieces of silver, the number of the new kingdom. The beginning of the kingdom. If I don't buy you with this, if I don't sell you this, then what does it matter? But the 30 is the coronation number. And now he becomes the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. Now remember, his ministry was 3.5 years, but he began at age 30. At age 30. So nugget 1, we have the age of the disciples. They were all young men. The Bible tells us so. This verse tells us so. And also, it was the same coin that Judas received. There are probably 100 different lessons that we can learn from this. But I've only got so much time on a Wednesday night to cover, okay? So we'll leave it at those 2 nuggets, at those 2 particular nuggets, that this one little passage about the temple tax teaches us. Amen?